Good morning. Everyone doing well today? Good, good. Our text for today is going to be 1 Kings chapter 17. So if you have a Bible, you'll want to make sure that you're at least handy or available to that text. 1 Kings 17 today. As we look at the text today, the thought that kept coming over in my mind was this idea of living life on the edge, or of living really close to an edge. And I'm going to say the point of the lesson is going to be like living on the edge of trust in God, but living on the edge. I have never had, actually there's been one time in my life where I was crazy enough to have the desire to go skydiving. I have never had the desire to jump out of a perfectly good airplane, like I said, except for one time. And I don't know what was going on in that time period of my life, except for some reason I said, I'm invincible, I am ready to go, let's do this. And then I got over it. I think Steve is a skydiver, I think. I commend those who have the courage to be 10,000 feet up and to open a door of an airplane and jump. But that to me would be living on the edge. You ever watch those videos on YouTube of the guy who's in the plane, and I mean they open the door and they put their foot on that little ledge and they stand there and they're like holding on, and then they just like let go and fall. My heart the whole time is racing. There's this anxiety within me and I'm like, oh, I can't do it. Lynn, have you done it? Oh, she would. So I start with this idea of living on the edge, and that there are some people who choose to do that. Like that's their idea of a good time, is we're going to go jump out of an airplane and then we're going to go get pizza afterwards. To some people, that is the idea of living on the edge. This year has shown another part of way people live on the edge. The people who all of a sudden got the call that their businesses were shut down, and the next thing they know, they had whatever money was in their bank account, and they were done. And it's a different kind of edge, because it's not the edge of an airplane looking out over the beautiful blue sky that you're about to jump and you've got a parachute as a safety net. That's the edge that is probably a little more difficult to live on. 78% of the U.S. population lives paycheck to paycheck. And that was the idea that whenever everything stopped, some people were living on the edge. May have been some of you, or some of you online that were living on the edge. I know that it's not uncommon for us, at least, for Ashley and I, boy, before payday, that checking account balance starts to look pretty low. And then it's like, whoo, payday happened. Thank the Lord it's arrived. You see, living on the edge occurs differently for different people. Some people look at it as the opportunity to prove something, to be a little bit of an adrenaline junkie, and to see if I could survive what is the next step. And to some people, it feels like utter misery and chaos, and that life is out of control. When I look at 1 Kings 17, I see a little of both of those things. So as we're opening up, I want to give you a little bit, I want to set the stage for just a moment. Ahab is king at this point. We're talking primarily focused in Israel, so it's the northern kingdom. Ahab has married the wicked witch, I'm going to call her Jezebel, and he has brought her in, and Jezebel comes into the scene, and Jezebel is an idol worshiper. She brings in the Baals and the Ashtoreths. And so as she's bringing them in, actually Ahab's bringing them in for her, but he brings all of this into Israel as a practice of worship. He says, no more are we going to worship Yahweh, the God who brought us out of Egypt. We're going to worship these gods because my wife says that these are the gods to worship, and I'm going to make her happy. Gentlemen, can I get an amen out of that one? Boy, how many dumb things have happened in time because a man was trying to impress a woman. And that's what happened. I'm not saying that Ahab was the beacon of moral fortitude to begin with, but that's the quality of the man that we're dealing with. And as he brings in these false gods, Elijah, the prophet, comes along, and he basically says, look, Ahab, if you're going to do this, and you're doing this, by your actions, it's not going to rain on the land until I say that it's going to rain again. And he walks away. That's kind of one of those mic drop moments. He says, it's not going to rain. Boom, we're done. And sure enough, guess how long it doesn't rain for? Over 3 years. So that's kind of the context that we're building within here. Elijah has just finished telling Ahab, it's not going to rain until I say it's going to rain. And this is coming because of Ahab's idolatry, what he's brought into Israel. And so as we come now to our text, I want us to pull up verse 4 for a moment. This is verses 4 and 6. Bryce, would you throw that up for us? Thank you, sir. God has told Elijah, Elijah, I want you to go to this valley, to this river, and I want you to hang out there. I'm going to command the ravens to feed you. This is verse 4. You shall drink from that brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. Jump to verse 6. And the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. Boy, that doesn't sound like too bad of a get-up, does it? Can you imagine going somewhere where, mind you, it hasn't rained in a long time, and you're the one hanging out by the little stream, by the brook of water. There's water there, and I guess, maybe 10 a.m. and maybe 5 p.m., I don't know, ravens start flocking in. I kind of imagine the birds, the scene from the birds where all the birds are. But they all come in, they start just laying down food before. Can you imagine what that would have been like? Except here's my problem. What would Elijah, as a practicing Jew, have thought of a raven? Unclean. And have y'all seen what ravens eat? It's not like a raven goes to the Kroger and pulls out a chicken and says, I'm going to fry you some chicken here. A raven pulls from dead animals. So I don't really know what the ravens brought. I'm sure whatever it was safe for him to eat. But I'm just imagining that they're bringing this stuff that they would normally have picked and are laying it down for him. And it's enough, it's sustenance. It's God's provision. But can you imagine being in the place where you totally rely upon God for everything? We think isolation and quarantine is bad at times. This guy is living beside a river waiting on ravens to bring him food. And he doesn't leave. That's his place of safety. Until one day, what happens? Since there's no rain, what happens to the brook? That brook dries up. Boy, what happened in your heart if God told you, Russell, go sit beside this brook. I'm going to feed you with ravens. You're going to get water from the brook. And all of a sudden the brook dries up. What's your feelings? I'm going to be thirsty, and it's going to be real quick. So I begin to see what is happening here is it's not going to be long before I'm wanting something else. Has God's provision stopped? So the voice comes from God again, telling Elijah what to do. This is verse 9. Let's jump to verse 9. Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon. Now, mind you, this is an aside. Jezebel just moved from Sidon, that region. So this is kind of her home country. And dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. Hot dogs, I tell you what, God's provision has taken care of everything again. I don't have to worry about nothing. I had ravens that brought me food. I had water by the brook. And now God, the one who I trust and have faith in, has commanded a widow to provide for me. Can you imagine? Now I want you to think for a moment. If you were to go to one of our little church ladies' houses, and you were to show up on her door, and you were to say, the Lord has told me that you are going to take care of me, what would you think would happen? I'm imagining every little church lady here, I would think that they would say, well, come right on in. And I imagine that for the first little bit until it came time for bedtime, it would probably be, you are most welcome here. You know what, I'm going to do dinner, and I was going to do this, so why don't you stay and we'll have a plate. I just happen to have cookies in the oven too, because I just imagine everyone's got cookies somewhere, don't they? And that's what I'm imagining happening. But then I imagine nighttime comes, and then there's that awkward conversation. Well, Josh, I love you and all, but it's time for me to go to bed. Where are you going to go? I imagine that being the circumstance. So that's just an imagination. However, the customs are different there. The customs there that, hey, hospitality wins. And I want to say, if my memory is correct, you had 3 days before the host could even ask you why you were staying with them. There was a time period that you were required to be hospitable before you could ever inquire of how long. Go to this woman. I've commanded her to feed you. Verse 10 and 11. Let's move forward. So he arose. He went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gates of the city, behold, the widow was there gathering sticks. This is perfect. I've already found the lady. I don't even have to work to find her. She's already here at the gate of the city, gathering her sticks. And he called to her, and he said, bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink. Well, it's kind of presumptuous, isn't it? I'm sitting here looking at this situation. I'm saying he's hollering out to some woman. But in some way, I also think of John when Jesus asked the lady at the well for a drink. And she says, the well's deep. How are you going to get a drink to begin with? But Elijah says, bring me a little bit to drink. Go to verse 11 for me, please. And she was going to bring it. He called to her again. Bring me a morsel of bread with your hand, in your hand. So the first part, when I look at Elijah being fed by ravens, I would say that trusting in God sometimes looks foolish. Sometimes it might even look stupid. This time I'm going to look and say that maybe trusting in God is bold. Because here he has come to a woman and he's asked her, he doesn't know her. He's passing into her city, and as he's coming into the city, she's by the city gate. He hollers out, give me something to drink. Doesn't know her name. She says, okay, well, I'll go get you something to drink. That's easy to do. But then he says, hey, while you're coming back, grab me a Big Mac from McDonald's. It's a little bold, isn't it? Now, granted, hospitality in this region would say, yes, that's what you do. If you are the host, and someone has come into your home, you are responsible to see to it that whatever they've asked for, you can provide to the best of your ability. That is common hospitality for them. But I want you to look at what her response is. The next passage, please, verse 12. And she said, as the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I'm gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in, prepare it for myself and my son, and that we may eat it and do what? Boy, that got real exciting, didn't it? I mean, that was the move that we were waiting for. We were wanting her to welcome him in and to fix him a feast, to throw in the cookies, to lay out the red carpet and to say, welcome to our home. Except in this case, she says, I ain't got nothing. At this point, the only choice that I've got is I'm cooking my last meal for my son and I. Mind you, we have so little food that I'm cooking my last meal. And our plan is to eat it and die. How bold is it for the prophet to ask at this point for more food? How sad is it that this was her last meal? I don't want you to look at this and say that she's some poor, impoverished widow. That's not necessarily the story that I want us to see. We know later on that Elijah lives in her upper room. He lives in her second story. Now, as a kid, I always thought if you had a second story, you were rich. And guess what? In their time, if you had a second story, you were doing fairly well. You weren't impoverished. You weren't begging on the street corners. You had some means. Money was not her problem. Food was. Because there was no food even here. Even though I think that if my We're about like 90 miles away from where Elijah started the story at. And food is scarce. Money's not her problem. She probably has money in the bank. She could probably afford to buy something if food was available. Food's not available. So if this is the image of a woman of means, a woman of wealth, I want you to imagine what life is like for the people who do not have anything. The people who, as I described, 78% of Americans live on the edge of financial ruin. We're talking about a woman who has, by assumption case. And Elijah goes to a woman who has. But what's everyone else like? What's all the other people? What are their financial situations like in a world where food cannot even be bought? What's happening? And as I began to see that image in my head, I realized the first application point that I see in this text for us is that individual choices impact more than myself. Do you think Ahab had any idea that when he said, Jezebel, you're sure beautiful, let me get down on a knee, let me marry you, let me move you back to my people, you know what, Baal, he ain't too bad, let's go ahead and bring him in. Do you think that Ahab had any idea the danger that he would bring to the people of God? That his sin would do to the people of God? Do we have any idea? And then Elijah's the one, I find it interesting. I don't know if this is the case or not, but we see Elijah speaks first, and then I think it's in verse 3 of the chapter that God speaks. So I kind of wonder, was Elijah speaking ahead of God? I still believe he's a prophet of God, so there's no real question, but it's like, is Elijah even putting the curse ahead of God's statement? I don't know, just throwing that out there. But as I see what Elijah says, do you think he even imagined the impact that his decisions would make as he cursed for there to be no rain? What about our choices? What choices do we make that may or may not impact people? And may or may not even impact the people that we don't know? Don't know if you've ever lost someone to drunk driving. But do you ever think someone probably just wasn't thinking that their decision could impact other people? I don't know right now, this thing right here is big on how it can impact other people. I don't know. But the way we act and what we do has a direct reflection to other people. And the way that we act and what we do can impact other people either in a positive way or in a negative way. And maybe the way that might impact other people may be by the way that I judge them or prejudge them based upon even their appearances. When Elijah comes to this widow, I'm going to paint a picture for a moment. You know, in my head, I initially think of some little lady. I think of some sweet little widow lady from church who's walking out and trying to make sure that she has everything ready for her and her son to eat their last meal and die. I also know that she was a faithful Baal worshiper, so she's an idolatrous woman. She has worshipped idolatry. Is it possible that she had piercings in service to or in honor to her God? Is it possible that she had tattoos and maybe that she acted a certain way because of her worship to an idolatrous God? Is it possible that she looked like a biker chick? I mean, I'm just throwing ideas out. What did she look like? And Elijah comes in and he's the good little Church of Christ boy that's walking along and he sees her. What was his reaction? Could he have prejudged her? And by his initial action, by the way he saw her, by her appearance, could he have made a judgment call and done something that would have drastically changed the story? We have no idea the way our decisions can affect other people. Have you ever heard those stories of people who they say, well, I talked to one person who was able to baptize one person, and how that one person through time, was able to bring about hundreds of people to the Lord. How one person can make the difference. Ahab did not have an idea what his actions would do to the people. And I think that shows a problem. The next part of our text, as we're moving on a little further, comes to verse 18. And this is where I say that following God, learning to trust, living on the edge of trust with God, sometimes just looks stupid. When I see this, the last part, this is verse 18. Elijah, this is the woman. Elijah, what have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to curse the death and to cause the death of my son. As I look at that, this is where I get that she's a faithful Baal worshiper. She is, when she makes this statement, she says, you have brought my sin to remembrance. She didn't know God beforehand. And I imagine that for her to provide for a different God's prophet was a big step for her. I imagine she didn't want to at first, but she did it. And God provided. He kept her jar of oil full, kept her flower pot full. And here's the part where she says, look, I have followed your God. I have followed you. I have provided for you. And all of a sudden, your God's going to kill my son now. Actually, my God, because of my faithlessness, is going to kill my son. She's looking back to her idolatrous gods, and she's saying, why, Elijah, have you caused me to be stupid? And when I see the pain that comes within her, that she's holding her son, begging for his life, why have you, Elijah, brought the remembrance of my sins against me? Elijah takes the boy, takes them upstairs, henceforth the second floor, lays on top of him and prays, begs God to bring the life back to the boy. And guess what? It's got a good ending. God does so. There's a happy ending to this story. This is verse 24. And the woman said, Elijah, now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord is in your mouth is truth. What did the death of this young boy, what did his death bring about in this woman? How much faith did she have afterwards? How much faith did she believe in God whenever her son is now raised? The flower pot has not run empty. The oil jar has not run empty. All of these things that she is seeing, how much faith does she have now? Because verse 24 says that she gives praise to God. I know that the words that Elijah speaks are true because what he has said, he's now brought my son back. What I see here comes to this idea of never judge a book by its cover. I think most of us probably saw her as the little widow lady until I introduced the idea that maybe she looked like a biker chick. Who knows what she looked like? I do know this. She was an apostate pagan living in a foreign land worshiping a false god. I know that about her. And as I look at her from that perspective, I could see that Elijah would want absolutely nothing to do with her. Don't judge a book by its cover. Because it's very possible that she looked like a terrorist. Remember back after 9/11, the image that we carried of people from the Middle East? Are they still not souls in need of a gospel? Imagine if she looked like a biker chick. Rough, tough, probably could take me to the ground. I have no problem being beat up by a woman. I know that there's some of those women that are rough. But does that mean that they don't need the gospel? Does that mean that there's not some need inside of them for the knowledge of who God is? And I believe it would take even someone coming back from the dead to show them that God was real, like this woman. The beautiful part, I believe, in this story, the greatest application that I can find, is that this story, in this chapter, there are three accounts of Elijah trusting in God. He trusted for the ravens, he trusted then for the widow, and then finally he trusted in the life of this child. Elijah trusted in God 3 times, and every time I asked the question after point 1, I asked it when I was talking with Russell here, was I said, does that mean that God has stopped providing? And Russell said no. If you didn't see it, he was shaking his head no. Every time that when the field dried up, when the sun died, whatever happened, God's provision had not stopped. It had only changed in form. God was still God. God was still providing. It's just it wasn't the way it looked like. And sometimes the way God provides for us today does not look the same as it will tomorrow. Maybe what happens tomorrow might be vastly different. And it doesn't mean that God stopped providing. It just means that the way He's providing is different. And so in this chapter, we are taught to trust God over and over and over again. Even when we feel that God may have abandoned, even when we feel that there is no trust left to be had, this chapter tells us to continue our faithfulness to God, because God is always faithful to us. I think some people will only come to the knowledge of God when they see the resurrected life. Much like this boy and this woman as he came back from the dead, that's what convinced her. That's what brought her faith to reality. And I'm going to wonder here for a moment, is it possible that some people need to see the resurrected Jesus to believe? I hope that that decision can be made before the judgment day, before the great day of the resurrection. But I hope that that can be done because I actually hope that the resurrection lives in you. I believe that when we live the life that Jesus Christ has called us to live, we are walking, talking little Jesuses in this world. That we become part of the incarnation of Christ today. That my position and my role is to walk as a living dead man in this world. That it's no longer Josh who lives, but Christ who lives within me. And the life that I now live, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave Himself for me. That everything that I do is kept in continual faith and devotion to God. And that is where we live. When we live on the edge, we live on the edge of trusting in God. Now, obviously, I don't have a very far way to fall. But when we live on the edge, we live on the edge of trust that God's going to provide. And His provisions are always going to look different from day to day. But I do know that He's provided His Son. I do know that He's provided His Son as an eternal solution, as the final solution to death. I know that He has provided His Son and the blood through His Son for our forgiveness. So that when I live on the edge of trust, I have full faith and confidence that my next step is always in His care. So it doesn't matter what the doctor comes back with. It doesn't matter what test I test positive for. It doesn't matter what dollar signs truly in my bank account. It doesn't matter what the future holds. Who's going to be president, let's say. What does matter is, do I trust that God will provide? If you'll allow me, I'd like to go ahead and offer our application prayer. And then Jim has our songs. Father, we approach You because we have nowhere else to go. We don't have actually, I suppose we do have false gods in our life, in our world, that sometimes we turn to, that sometimes we give our lives to. And God, I would pray that, like this widow, we would find the comfort and the strength in your word and in your message and in the resurrection of Jesus Christ to be committed faithfully to you. I would ask that in those moments we would see the resurrected Son, and that we would live in accordance with the way He would want us to live. And I know that in asking that, I ask only that your power and your strength and your Spirit consumes us and fills us so that we can be the people you've called us to be. In the same request, I ask, Father, for you to make us like a prophet. I would never want to endure what Elijah endured. But God, if enduring what Elijah endured made us who you want us to be, then God, bring whatever is needed so that we have the commitment and the faith like Elijah to speak out against sin and idolatry, to speak out against wrongs when it involves the people of God sinning, and Father, to stand for you, but at the same time to walk on the edge knowing that you have got us. That regardless of what can happen in this world, you have the true future in your hands. And God, that's easier said than done. It's far easier for me to acknowledge that you're in control than it is to live it. But Father, help me to live it. Help me to walk every day living in your trust and in your obedience. Father, this is our prayer as a collective body, as your church. And we all say, amen.
Let's stand to sing.